Welcome, everyone. Bienvenidas y bienvenidos a nuestro panel de hoy, SOC and Cybersecurity Efficiency. Antonio Imperial, nuestro CISO, va a estar moderando, and Daniela García, Watch Commander of Global Cybersecurity Operations de HCBC, junto con Tina Vélez, Principal Solutions Architect de SPEL, van a estar platicando sobre este tema que abordaremos hoy. So, Antonio, thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Fao. First off, I want to start telling you that I'm flattered to be on this panel. I think we're going to learn a lot from our specialists. This is a topic that I care a lot. This is our SOC. It's where our Security Operations Center. It's where everything should be taken care of. This is our first responders per se. So we're going to talk about how the conception of the SOC is, and then how to make it better, efficient, better, leaner, meaner, stronger, right? That's the whole point. This is our point. Not, of course, this isn't everything on our security strategy, but hell, this is super important. Like, this is our first line of defense and awareness. So first off, to get this going, I'm gonna ask Daniela. We're gonna keep it, of course, conversational, because I think we're gonna learn a lot. So from this gal's experience. So Daniela, first off, I wanted to ask you, what's the current situation of a SOC? Like, what do you see as a common, the common perception of the SOC? How is it built today, and how is the challenges we face now on the SOC?
Thank you, Antonio. It is my pleasure to be here. Yeah, the cybersecurity operations teams is usually in an industry to defend the assets and information. In HSBC, it was built to fight against the digital threats. Currently, HSBC has a very mature, let's say, environment. However, I come from long experience in these teams, and I have seen this evolve. As you were saying, sometimes there is some misconceptions for security operations, as they are kind of storing logs, and they can be requested for different tasks that sometimes doesn't belong to them, such as regulatory tasks, requests that, to fix things sometimes that are not under their scope. And this needs to be a little bit more mature in terms that we need to understand that these security operations teams are there to defend the bank or defend the industries, and sometimes to make better whatever industry we are working on. For example, in HSBC, we are here to defend our customers, or information, and everything that we are looking after. So yeah, I think it was sometimes seen as a backlog team, that it is there, and sometimes this is a cost for an industry. However, I think nowadays it's a necessity. The industry needs to defend their information and their assets. So we need to give them the tools, the people, also capable people that can defend what we are doing, and also provide them with also the space, or keep them away from things that are not under their scope. So it is, so let them like kind of doing their job.
All right. I think you made some really important topics that I want to touch on further down the line, which is the misconceptions, which is that they pertain to log management or regulatory compliance, and how that can bog down probably your alerts and your system, IT hygiene and that kind of topics. But I want to hear from Tina how she sees the challenges we face right now on the security operations center.
So, buenos dias. Thank you very much for having me. Wanted to say a lot of what has been said is pretty much exactly what we see when we talk with customers in the Americas and even overseas. So security operations centers have gone from being seen as just this cost center thing that you must have, and you're always arguing for money to try to address risk to the business and just overall things that you can do to secure the business from overall disruption, to this shift, because now we're seeing a lot more cybersecurity awareness, even at the personal level, right? So as people come to understand that security is not just important to them in the corporate domain, but also in their personal space, right? The security of your own accounts, the integrity of all your own data. There's been this shift that we're seeing in terms of management and leadership wanting to take a more holistic view, right? So moving beyond a compliance or checkbox driven approach to security, moving away from this concept of just buy all the tooling that you can get your hands on and stand it up. The reality of that tends to be you can't just go overnight from zero to nothing. So we have seen this change in terms of gauging the maturity of security operations centers and seeing how they essentially intersect with other parts of the business to become a business enabling unit, as opposed to just this cost center. And so over time, I expect that to change, to see more of that evolution, especially as we see this change in the attack surface as well, right? The perimeter and the era of the on-prem environment is pretty much gone. As we see more adoption of the cloud and hybrid enterprise kind of setups, it means that security needs to be the person, the process, pretty much all of the operations involved in the business need to have security baked in. The question becomes how you get there and what that trajectory looks like. So hearing a lot of overlap, and I'm pretty sure that these are essentially universal problems.
Thank you. Thank you, Tina. And we'll touch more on that efficiency part later on. But I want to, for the sake of our audience, I want to drill you down a bit or task you for the difference, which I think it drives some of these misconceptions on and we're going to touch a little bit on technology and some processes, right? So I'll ask you, Daniela, all of this, we have compliance that tell us that we need to keep logs for 1 year, and then PCI it's going to go ahead and it's going to be like 3 years, right? So we have some components on our architecture, which is like or SIEM or security information and events management, that it's getting all of these logs, and now they're going to ask us. So can we talk a little bit about the difference between log management and security operations and our SIEM, right? Because I think on the industry, there's like kind of, hey, our SOC is the guys that watch the SIEM. And I think that's a really, really narrow view of security and of security events. And then all of these regulatory compliances and all of these like IT requests are gonna start bugging or response times down, right? Or we're gonna just get such a narrow view of stuff because we won't get this quick response time that we want on a security operations center, right? So sorry I'm preaching, but Daniela, can you talk about on your experience, how you see these and how these misconceptions kind of affect and try to pull us toward, hey, compliance, and try to get us fatter, to say, and not leaner.
Yeah,
right?
I have seen that. I can tell you from my experience that in HSBC, we have kind of, so we are trying to solve that. It was created, separated, a specific team that is handling with all the regulations. HSBC, the security operations team is global, as you know, and we are managing, or we are seeing information or all these kind of requirements for many countries. Mexico is just one of them. We have each country has their own requirements. Let's say Indonesia, for example, it's a very, very specific, requesting many things. China and many others that we are kind of attending. Therefore, HSBC has created like a separated area, and they are handling all these requests. They are providing them or all the regulatory teams with what they need. So that has separated us for that work. And I think this is a clever thing to do because, as you may say, sometimes it is sad work that the security operations shouldn't be doing. We need to be focused on protecting the assets. Therefore, something like that should be kind of approaching in the future for all the industries. The SIEMs, on the other hand, can be overloaded with information that sometimes we don't need. And as I'm saying, there are many regulations in the countries. There are many requirements that need to be accomplished. However, security operations has to have an efficient SOC, an efficient SIEM that allow us to look for information that we need when we need it in an efficient manner. Therefore, we need to make sure that the information that it's ingested in the SIEM that is being used by the response teams is accurate. It is not easy, to be honest. having all the information that we need, it is a challenge. However, I think the industries needs to be looking forward to get this streamlined information that is helping them to get the relevant information, not all of the information, because we can have many things that sometimes we don't need. We need to make sure that we have what we need, but in an efficient manner.
Okay, so in practice, what we see is that there's confusion between compliance and security, right? People think that being compliant means being secure. And it is, I think, quite the opposite. Like, you need to first be secure, and then compliance need to be like a byproduct of being secure, right? But you build first your security program, and then you build your compliance program, not the opposite. But what I'm getting to is that we're talking about two different scopes, two different teams, as you said, Daniela, which is the way. So maybe we are looking at two different, even two different systems, right? So the SOC divorced from the or compliance log management. I'm sorry if I'm trying to build all of this for the sake of our audience, which might not be on the security operations side, right? So Tina, what's your take on this? When you see all of this on the field, what do companies get right, and what do companies often get wrong about these things that we know are driven in parallel, but often get mistaken on different processes and different.
Well, the scenario described by Daniela is very, very prevalent out there, right? You have these SIMs that are functioning as a repository of pretty much every log source that an environment has, to the point that the tool is exceptionally bloated. The security team can't really use it, but there might be something like an infrastructure team or an IT team that's getting value out of it. At the end of the day, although these are all separate functions, and I'm going to include compliance in that kind of bucket, right? These separate teams, there is overlap. But when we think about the tooling and the way that you can best enable the security operations team, sometimes it makes sense to consider maybe having a separate data lake for all of the regulatory and retention needs, and then allowing the security team to function with a SIM that is going to be getting the relevant logs and the relevant alert data for things that they will be triaging and actioning on your behalf. If it gets to the point where the compliance team is requiring security to stop their work, to stop looking at alerts, stop looking at the SIM, to fulfill one of a gazillion regulatory requests, that's not a good use of the operator's time. And so thinking about any organization that works globally, right, like we've already identified this, every country has its own set of regulations, right? And it gets trickier and trickier with each day, knowing that if you're in APAC, you need retention of these things for this length of time. If you're dealing with any kind of GDPR stuff, this is what it looks like. This is what your DPAs need to look like. So there needs to be an acknowledgement and a recognition that you can still fulfill those functions, but it doesn't necessarily have to go via security. And on the compliance side, I would also add, thinking of any kind of framework from a compliance perspective, that's not the full house, if you will. That's only meant to serve as the foundation. So creating security by design should result in compliance and hitting those checkboxes. But if you do it the other way and you say, I need to get this tool, okay, we check the box, we're done, now we're automatically secure. If that's the expectation that you're working under, it's pretty misguided. And the reality is going to be that you will continue to be in a reactive place because you're not going to be ready to actually work with any of the signal that you're getting from the environment around activity.
All right. Thank you, Tina. I see Leopoldo join us. So I want to make an analogy. Those who know me know that I love analogies. So we can hit the floor running, Leopoldo. So I see the SOC and the promise, or I see the SIEM. The promise of the SIEM, if you remember, when we started using SIEMs, it was we're gonna correlate and we're gonna save you from a threat, right? The environment got worse, and we often don't get this. So SIEMs, at some point, via compliance, via not getting instrumented correctly, became, as I like to tell it, they can give you a great picture of the bus that run you over. They can say you, license plates. It was red Kenworth T100, excellent, but you got run over. And the promise of the SIEM was that it's like, hey, a truck is coming, get out of the way, right? So I see this process, and I see this getting fulfilled now by the SOC. So my point is, let's not bog down the SOC again, like we did with SIEM, because of compliance with regulations and having to store all of these data and people trying to pile into this database per se. And let's not kill that process also, and let's keep secure and keep getting our security ahead. So Leopoldo, sorry for that long introduction, but what's your take on it, on all of these challenges we face on the SOC and trying to keep our organization secure and trying to get ahead of the assailants?
I think that how a SOC is conceived in an early stage is like monitoring. Now the capability to have eyes all over the place. But the value is, what do you do with so much information? How do you track events? No, and events that are not created or do not have an impact immediately, like an incident in technology, but events that are being fed through months of years of people trying to understand your vulnerabilities and moving in a gradual pace. No, so even though the monitoring capability of a SOC is fundamental and needs to be there, the most important thing is connectivity and understanding of the purpose, of why you are tracking so much data. What is the information you can extract from there to connect, to protect your business, to protect the data that belongs to your customer, the data that belongs to your corporation. So if I see now the SOC, now we put into the SOC really intelligence, connectivity, being able to prevent not only these incidents, but the threats, and also to evaluate the potential impact of those. And even though it's like the data that it's where you're gonna get most of the information, because there you need to be very active on understanding what is normal and what starts to be out of the normal behavior. No, I think that if you do not have this understanding or this purpose very clear, and you don't have the capability to connect dots into potential threats, and then the capability to communicate with the different functions of the organization, then you are not taking the real value of a SOC. And for doing that, you need a lot of disciplines, and you need a lot of specialized people that it is deep on understanding, deep on technology, but at the same time, at least has communication skills to work in a collaborative way. So I no longer, when you say SOC, I no longer think in people looking at screens. No, it's much more than that.
Yeah, thank you, Leopoldo. And I think you touched 2 points that I had on my agenda, which is super important, which is intelligence operations, and the other one, super important, context. What's the context? What's happening is not out of context. So that guy, as you say, that guy looking at like 1,000 screens, if he doesn't have context, he's gonna miss like 90% of things, or the threats that really happen in organizations, right? So all of that knowledge, how do we make it so our SOC analysts can take all of that knowledge of context, and then all of that knowledge of intelligence operations, the feeds that come from other sources in the industry that we give and take, how do we get that to being operational, and how we make that work for organizations? So as you say, our SOCs are better at understanding what's happening and not just being the alert center that goes and taps on, hey, we're getting hacked here, right? It's before it happens, you look at context, you look at intelligence, so you are trying to see this. So Daniela, can you talk about how do we make this operational? How do we get this into the work we do day by day on the SOC? How do these feeds of intelligence and this context, how it works for us?
Yeah, I think this is a very important topic right now, because I'm talking about a big industry such as HSBC. We have a large surface to protect. Therefore, we are building a big capability to defend our assets. We have a very good team that is in intelligence. What they are doing is getting information, external information for different sources that sometimes including even the underground, or different sources that can represent a risk or a threat for the bank, or therefore these intelligence functions are very important, because they understand what is the risk environment that is out there. They kind of aware us of what can be, or maybe, or potentially can impact us. Therefore, we can act before that happens. We can get more controls, or get a more secure, or more different activities that we can do depending on the threat, based on this intelligence or this information they are gathering for the outside. So I think this is very important. As we know, the world right now, it is very hostile. We are facing different actors, vulnerabilities that are impacting us and all the industries. It is not only one industry, it is all of us. Therefore, we need to be aware of what is happening, and then act on that behalf. So I think it is this context of the external attacks needs to be very, very aware for the industries. And it works as well with another function. At least here in HSBC, we have threat hunters that are using this intelligence in order to complement the secure that we can do or we can build. It depends on these actors. And they also look for indicators of compromise that can represent the presence for one of or another attack. So I think these two functions are complementary. So need to be like also part of the security operations centers.
Thank you, Daniela. And I think you touched a super important point of attribution on attacks that I'm really passionate about, but I need to get back at, because I want to ask Tina about building this, right? Because now we're talking about capabilities and a well-functioning SOC, but how do we measure the maturity of our SOC model, and how do we build a reliable SOC model? I want our audience to know that it can be done, and they can evaluate what they have, their program, and kind of get us on track, right? Because we've talking about fully functioning SOC operations global, like HPC has. So how can our audience start measuring the maturity of their program, and how can they get better or get on track? I know it's a tough one, but
this is an hour-long conversation
one,
at the very least, but I'll keep it short.
Right.
So as a really, really good starting point, you have to know exactly what you're measuring, right? So you want to define and start with having a broader conversation around what is the attack surface that you have as a business. And that also includes your people. So like your leadership, anybody who has privileged access to the environment, that all needs to be considered in terms of your assets and things that need securing. And then the next step is figuring out, okay, we know what the environment looks like. What type of signal do we need to get? How do we go about implementing that? And moving towards that first stage of kind of a mature, what I would call early stages of a cybersecurity program, where you are able to at least detect. And we've talked a bit about that. You are in a place where you have a SOC, you have tooling deployed in the environment, you have people with eyes on glass. The next stage becomes, what do you do when something actually happens? And what do you learn from that process? What are you able to tell as far as a story based on the data points and the different telemetry you get throughout the environment? And getting to that next stage means understanding context. So business critical assets, the people, the types of things that the analyst needs to know. If this activity happens on a regular user's machine, it's okay, we don't need to look at it. But if it happens on somebody with elevated access, we'll want to have eyes on that just to dig in to make sure something didn't take place. Incorporating that with intelligence, which is what we were just discussing now, how you bring in all of these potential indicators of compromise and apply that to your own threat model for the environment is also key. What you want to do as you continue maturing the journey is really focusing on that signal to noise optimization, which is the problem that we're dealing with now in most environments. You have a lot of activity, you have all of the logs, and you have people looking at them. But what is it telling you about the environment, and what are you learning from those things that's actionable to help you become more proactive? So when an incident happens, what is the response process? What do you consider from a resilience perspective in terms of maybe some new controls that you could put into place to prevent this activity moving forward? Does it change anything for you operationally? Are there parts of the business or business process that might need to be revisited to reduce that area of risk? And I know I'm kind of all over the place with how this reflects to the cybersecurity journey, but the bigger picture here is that there needs to be that communication between the security side and the business side. And if you don't have that feedback loop, you're building in isolation, and you're going to end up potentially with all sorts of tooling. But how does that impact the business? How does it make sure that when an event does take place, you are able to get back and operate quickly, where you're not down for days because you got knocked out by ransomware? Things like reputation damage from these types of incidents, you can't really put a price on them, right? You could be knocked offline for days. And we've seen that happen all over the world, and it's going to continue happening with ransomware. So how you create a program, build that SOC over time, build the confidence in the operators, make sure you're focusing on the right types of signal, and how that fits into the broader business and environmental context is something that takes time to develop. But the very starting point is going to be what I would consider that super immature SOC, where you're in that detect only mode. The next stage becomes response, how you investigate, how you triage, and where you focus your resources and your time.
And if I may,
thank you, Tina. Oh yeah, sorry, Daniela. Go ahead.
I just wanted because I think Tina mentioned a very important topic, which is like this communication between the cyber teams and the business. And I think this is very important. First, as Tina is saying, for understanding what are the most valuable assets, we need to know what are the crown jewels to protect them even more than the other assets. We need to make that difference. And also, in terms of the response, it needs to be a communication with the business in order to understand what is the impact that a certain threat it is representing for the company. And also, what is the best way to act based on that, to mitigate and to control that risk that it is taking place at that moment. So that communication is key for this for the security teams. We need to get that information as well for them in order to understand the context again. for what is happening and how it's better to act to in a timely manner, respond and better control whatever risk is happening.
That's great, Daniela, because that's actually was one of the points, because Leopoldo also talked about it, and I want you to, or I want us to get there on how at the end of the SOC journey is not just alerts, right? How can we learn and be more resilient, and then take that feedback loop, and then start building better, right? Or security architecture, or security programs, process, people, right? Like we see these incidents, and then we take this and build a better institution, right? A better program. Leopoldo, can you talk about it, to like how you integrate all of this and make it a business and integrate it as a business enabler, as the SOC as a getting better on that loop, and we'll get to future SOC in a minute. But I think this is super important, because it gives us the maturity we're looking for. I think your volume is super low.
Okay.
Oh, no worries.
So remember, when there's an incident, the SOC is the first one to know about it. No, so
hopefully yes.
No, hopefully yes. No, so but then you should have a full incident management process, include and rehearse that process, because and plan for the worst. No, what about if you have some ransomware? No, you need to ensure that your customer do not get in panic. You need to ensure that you can manage proper communication to the press, to the public, to the government. No, and then it's quite important, this sensitivity of not looking this just from a technical challenge or the technical aspect. It's the reputational, it is the harm and the trust that our customers might lose from us, no, and the material impact that the company or our customers might have, no, and for that you need to educate top management. So cyber must be part of the regular conversation at the boards. No, you must be very clear on where the risks are and why the investments you're recommending are mitigating those risks. It's very easy to talk in academic terms. No, if you have all the tools, if you have all the protections, no, on all the levels, but nobody has the money or the time, no, to implement and change at the speed of the environment change. So then you need to do a lot of education to your management, so you can build that trust. But it's not a trust that it's based on, it's not my problem, that's your problem, no, fix it for me. That may be a way to solve it, but when there's an issue, that lack of education, that lack of true communication will not help. So I think that it's quite important that we are able to translate all these frameworks, security frameworks, into very simple words, so we can explain, we can recommend, we can gain an educated trust, and then we can talk about real risk management. And then work with all the different areas to be prepared for a response. Because no matter how much protected you are, you will be subject to one event, no? And then you should be prepared. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I think that's something that we cannot forget. educate the management, not only to get the money, but also to be able to respond effectively in case of any event.
It is super important. We need to convey the value, right? And I think it's often people don't put that many hours into trying to get across that the SOC is value, is not a money sink, right? Things will happen. We can have investment all over on the kill chain or on your security program, all over the place. Things are gonna happen like that. We know for sure. Been working for this a long time, and things happen and happen and happen again, right? Our measure is how quickly we cut them, how quickly we recover, right? So on that feature of efficiency and on being faster and getting with the times, I want to move into the future SOC. How do we integrate new technologies into the SOC? There's a lot of talk about automation with SOAR, as you know, like security operations, automation, and response. There's product, of course, but how do we integrate all of different technologies to really work for us on the day-to-day with robots and robotic process automation and everything we have on our tool chest? How can we get better and get the upper hand on that monitoring and be as efficient? And I'm gonna give Tina the mic so she can tell us what we're looking at on that purpose of automation.
Oh, thanks. This topic in particular is very near and dear to me. Going back to the problem of signal noise in terms of the telemetry you get from the environment, understanding what's important, what you should be focusing on, what can be closed out in terms of the SOC versus where they really need to be looking at things that could be potentially actionable leads, right? Indicators that there might be something happening in the environment and being able to get it earlier before the event actually pops off. There's a lot of opportunities to use something like a SOAR platform, which yes, it becomes yet another tool, but it's something that if implemented properly can reduce a lot of the manual effort that is spent by the operators in the SOC and can also potentially reduce some of the tool bloat by taking care of some of those use cases. But it goes back to understanding what types of activity you see in the environment, what's normal, how you go about responding, and trying to identify where you will see that most immediate kind of return on investment if you use these automation opportunities. So for example, going back to this concept of response, if something pops off, if you have a workstation that has ransomware on it, and if you have an alert fire that says there is ransomware on this host, if you have a SOAR playbook that's defined for that, and you've set it such that that trigger will automatically isolate that workstation, stopping ransomware from propagating in the environment, that to me is a win. But getting to the point where you're able to define those playbooks means you need to know what your response process looks like. You need to understand the risk, you need to understand the threat landscape, and you need to make sure that you have that communication across all those different business units, right? Technology, leadership, management, and security, so that you can be in a position to say, this is why we're going to make this change. This is what it's going to look like. This is what the end user can anticipate happening if this takes place on their machine, and communicating that all throughout. At the end of the day, when you start making those steps, I would say that you're rapidly maturing your own response processes, which in turn, you can go to the business and say, I'm helping drive down risk by implementing this specific tool that is going to help us respond more quickly when something does happen. Because we all know things will continue to happen. This threat landscape is aggressive at this point. And we are at the point now where we see things in the mainstream news about the types of critical CVEs that are being exploited, around new ODAs that are out there in the wild. And that's just what's being covered in the press. There's plenty of activity that those of us that are in this day-to-day know is happening out there. Blue teams, right? Your security operations center, your defenders are working nonstop because the aggression and the level of almost the volatility in terms of the threats continues to increase. So being in a position to say, the future SOC is going to be one that is implementing the ability to reduce the manual effort on the analyst and to overall streamline operations, means you have to take a really good look at how you respond. There's going to be a lot of kind of process analysis in terms of how you're operating. And then you look at where the tool can fit best to help you get there. You don't want to be in a position where you're just continuing to buy tools and they sit on the shelf, which is what we see a lot in a lot of organizations. But when we see this potential to use things like robots, to use automation, there's a lot of places within the security operations workflow where it makes a lot of sense to make that investment. And so communicating that value back to management, right? We're going to respond more quickly. That means our risk goes down. It means that we can impact all of these things in a quantifiable manner is super important. So that's where I see all these things headed. It's just a question of how you get there.
Mm-hmm. I want to stick with you, Tina, because I want to also say that we're not getting rid of the analyst. Like we see this in the intelligence community, doing intelligence. I mean, most countries do their intelligence. You don't get rid of the analyst. Leopoldo said, and as we established, we need context. Computers don't get context. We get intelligence. Intelligence comes from analysts. Computers are not good at getting all of those nuisances that our brain is so good at. So how do we integrate for that modern SOC all of that technology to make our analysts super efficient or more efficient? And how do we do it now? Well, integrate technology. And then I want to pivot to Daniela to see how they're working to integrate all of this into making things more efficient in the right now, right?
Right. So the end goal isn't getting rid of the humans. You've identified clearly we still have to use our brains to put together a lot of these data points and to create that story. Machines can't do that, and I doubt they're ever going to be at a position to do so. And I hope, Skynet doesn't happen right now and come after me. But a lot of what we see with this tooling is where we can say an analyst is doing these specific steps every time this event takes place. Can we automate those steps and then give the analyst the answers that those steps would have provided had they done them manually, and then let them go from there? Meaning you can cut down investigative time, you can cut down that response cycle because you already have a lot of this information being essentially presented to the analyst without them having to do those steps. It also means that the analyst can then focus on additional things like threat hunting or maturing other parts of the program, moving the analyst away from that kind of constant churn of looking at every log and having to then do a pivot to this console and do this lookup and then come back here and do these other things. It frees them up to be more efficient in terms of addressing the day-to-day operations, but it also gives them more time, train them up on something else. Maybe there's a new tool that you're introducing into the environment, or maybe you're really embarking on a journey to the cloud. You're going to want to free them up to use their brains on these other things. So look at where those opportunities exist to address the kind of monotonous tasks, which are part of security operations. This is not necessarily glamorous work. Like there's going to be a lot of repetition. And so looking at those opportunities, right? Instead of having you do these things over and over, use the machines to do that, present the information, and then have the analyst use their brain to put together all of those data points and figure out exactly what's going on. That's where I see this going.
Thank you, Tina. Daniela, that's one of the things that I know you're on the front line of all of this. So how do you integrate all of this technology and all of these processes to make your SOC more efficient and make your life easier and your analyst's life easier, so they can focus on what really brings value on an analyst and not doing this repetitive work?
And I think this is a very important point in here, because the analysts are our first line of defense. They are the eyes of what we are defending. They are seeing all these alerts coming to them, and they are investigating. They are the ones that first take this, and then if they see something that is relevant, they can escalate, so we can act on what it is required to mitigate the risk. But even though there is some tools that are more efficient right now, we are requiring to have these analysts or these human brains, as we were saying, to take decisions, right? To take and how to take decisions to get all these contexts. So I think one very important point in here it is to get them as less work as possible, so they can have this space to get deep investigations, really good investigations for the events that we consider relevant. And how do we do this? Using, as Tina is saying, the tooling to get these kind of filters for them to get all these contexts, and then the tools decide a little bit on what it is actually relevant. And I think in terms of the tooling, that is kind of the future. The tooling to get a little bit more intelligent in getting more context, and because one attack is just not one event that just happened there. It is a series, as we know, the kill chain, and there are many frameworks out there, as Mitri or whatever. So we have this context. We can integrate them in the tool to get this context and to understand that one attack can be seen in different stages. So then the tool decide a little bit on what is actually relevant, and then provide the analysts with these really relevant activities that we need to investigate more. And we need to get even more context and get more information to take a decision if this is something that needs to be mitigated or not. So I think the future should be about getting the analyst or the SOC as less work as possible, so they can have all this space to do investigations in a deep way, in a very accurate way, and so help them to be more efficient in their work, and they can have even more specialization in this alert specific or this event that needs to be investigated.
Thank you, Daniela. Leopoldo, I have some easy questions that I know that have really, really hard answers, which is how do we get better? How do we prepare for the future SOC, and how we make this so our people are better, our resilience is better, and we prepare for our ever darker future as we see the context. So it's a super open question, but I know the answer is super hard.
So for me, at the end, it's about people. No, it's about purpose, about deep understanding of what is your role and what do you want to protect. No, and for me, it's like in the development world that you used to have like the developer, the tester, the quality assurance, all that stuff. And now we want the multi-stack engineering. No, that's what's happening for me on the cyber world. The analyst, you want to start specializing in kind of threats and use all the different tools, no, and artificial intelligence as well, to define what is that normal that we talk about. No, because for what is normal for you might be quite different from what is normal for me. No, and you have a lot of tools, no, to detect anomalies or deviations. But it's like in infrastructure world, if you monitor everything, you get so many false alarms that at the end you never act in a preventive way. That might happen on cyber. You get so many alarms that instead of moving to do something, you get frozen because everything is on red. And I think the analysts should develop that capability of discriminating, how the normal, what is the normal, and how that normal is being evolving, with the new threats, with the new tools, with the new blue oceans that the business is going through. So and it's about giving the right tools, but making sense of those tools through understanding, through capacitation or training, no, but also through experimenting, no. So, how? And for me, the question is: do we want our people to experiment in a real event, or do we want our people to experiment in a safe environment? It is like a pilot, no? These guys become your pilot, and pilots have a lot of hours of training, not flying an airplane, no? So I think we need to be very deep on if what do we expect from the analysts, that expectations are growing a lot, and how we are enabling them to be able to deliver to that new expectation. No, so we need to put a lot of effort into training, into simulation, and into integrating these tools, but for that purpose.
Thank you, Leopoldo. I think one of the points you touched on, it was touched on other talk, and it stuck with me, is your security program. It's hard to do. It's harder when you're hacked. If you're dealing with an event, you don't start planning who your spokesperson is and who's going to run point and who's going to, like, you're just going to make your life super hard, right? It's the same as your business continuity plan. You can't do it on your knees while one of your sites is down. So why are you waiting for it? Why are you waiting for that event that we know it's going to happen, right? The same as your SOC, the same as your security program. And we're running out of time, so I want to touch one of the questions that we have from the audience, which is a super basic, but a super fair question, and I think it's super important. It's how you find the equilibrium in your investment between cost to prevent an attack and cost to recover from one. And I think it speaks a lot, because some things we take for granted as security specialists. But Tina, can you talk about how we go and do a security assessment on a SOC, and how do we go about and build? As I said, it's super hard when you already have the security event, but how do we do it the proper way?
The proper way, you spend time building out the IR plan, and you practice. You have tabletops. So you talk about the people and process side, but then you also address the tooling side, right? Give the analysts some kind of safe environment, one of these kind of continuous assessment type sandbox things for them to play in, to go through what it's going to look like from a technology perspective when something does pop off. But in terms of really understanding how to quantify that impact, what does the cost look like to the organization if you are knocked offline? So for example, for HSBC, I'm sure that you have a number, you know exactly what it would be by the hour if the ATMs are all knocked offline in terms of how much business is being lost. If you're any other type of organization, let's say you get locked out of your entire email instance and nobody can conduct business, what does that look like for you and your customers? So wanting to think through what those scenarios look like and try to put dollar amounts on those, right? Try to quantify the cost of the impact. And then you start thinking about the frequency of these events potentially, right? Once you get to the point where you know your environment, you know where the risks are, you know if there's specific vulnerabilities that are at play that you can't address for whatever reason, start identifying those specific pockets of almost critical risk and try to think about the dollars it will take to address that specific thing. So at that point, it's tooling, but then you also want to think about the operational cost. What will it take in terms of resources? What is the amount of times that you could anticipate event X happening, right? And some of this becomes, it's very much art and science, but you want to start getting a sense in terms of data as to what the impact would be if something takes place. And then you can use that to try to extrapolate what the cost of defending against that, but defending against that plus, right? Because you're not just modeling specifically to that one scenario. Whatever you're doing on the defense side is going to have broader impacts. It's going to address other events and other kinds of things that happen in the environment. but it all goes back to being able to quantify and thinking about risk and thinking about impact to the organization. And I cannot emphasize enough the need to make sure that your analysts are able to train, constantly develop. They need to stay curious. They need to know what's happening in the threat landscape, and creating a culture where there is that constant situational awareness, knowing the environment, knowing what's happening in the world in terms of cyber activity, and giving the analysts the tools and the opportunities to learn and continue refining their skills. Absolutely crucial.
Thank you, Tina. Daniela, what's your take on it, on how do we bring this value forward for the organization and show them our value, and how do we quantify all of this with our SOC efforts and our security program?
I think it's, as Tina is saying, we need to understand what is the value for the industry and what can be, what is the impact that a threat can represent to an industry. And once you have this assessment on the invest that you do in the SOC, and once you have this assessment on what an attack can cost you, I think it is easier to understand what is this difference. In many industries, it is the amount of what they are paying for getting attacked, such as a ransomware or a denial of service. We need to take an account also the reputational damage that an attack can cause to the industry. So all of these can represent a really big impact to your company. So then you need to know this. And then many times, if you compare all these damage or all these costs that an attack can represent to your company, the cost to getting a program that is involving all these specific people, process, and technology, it is going to be less, or what you are going to be losing if you are getting attacked. So I think this is important for the industries to understand this, and also to make this measure for them. So in a bank, it is easy to know we need to be protecting at all costs. So this is why HSBC is investing a lot to getting a really good program.
Thank you. I think as I see Faudi looking at me, I think we need to get on into our closing statement. So Leopoldo, if you can tell us, and then we'll get super quick so we can get into our close. Sadly, our time is up. I know we can keep talking about it for at least an hour.
Yes, so I think that is fine. The investment you do, put it into the highest risk, highest impact you can have, and balance the preventive and the response. Because you should be prepared. So, but as you said, so cyber is not only an IT or a cyber subject, needs to be on the table of the board and continuously discussing, educating to get the right funds and share the risk. I have always said, if you have a risk, share it. Otherwise, you will be finger pointed. So.
Thank you, Leopoldo. Sorry to because it was brief. Faudi, we're set. Thank you all to our experts. It was a great talk. Fau, you wanna take the closing statements?
Yes, thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us today. It was really a pleasure having you, Tina, Daniela, Leopoldo. Thank you very much. And I just want to invite all of our audience to our upcoming session next Tuesday. We will have a talk on ransomware. So please join us, and thank you everyone. Thank you so much.